What would your take be on photo essays?
Oh, I love photo essays, and my whole training and everything to do with my early work was all built around photo essays. I loved picture post was my favourite, and even if you think about at Cardiff University, where I taught, there's the Tom Hopkinson Library collection. They've got complete editions of picture post, which he edited, of course, and Tom Hopkinson set up the school there in the 1970s, the first postgraduate school for training journalists in Europe, in fact. And I was party to, in my time there, building up that library of work. And there are many magazines there. And what I like particularly about Picture Post, and it had a sister publication called Lilliput, was that you can actually trace some of the history of photojournalism, and if you just study those two publications, you can learn just about everything you need. So if you were to take, say, some Lilliputs from the late 1930s, they paired pictures up. So they always paired pictures in a way that was greater than the sum of their parts. So you might have, and they never made a judgment. The judgment was in your head as the reader. So they might have a picture of, a politician looking like a horse braying. And then on the other side of the page, you'd have a horse braying. And they didn't say, oh, doesn't, this politician look like a horse braying? You made that connection yourself. So the editors were treating you as an intelligent being. They weren't having to spell it out. So I absolutely loved Lilliput. So look at lots of Lilliputs if you want to understand picture stories. And then in Picture Post, there are so many great photo essays. But if you look at, if we're talking about Wales, if you look at Bert Hardy's story on Cardiff Bay, which I think was done in 1950-ish, it's an essay on multicultural Britain before anybody knew what multicultural Britain was, because Cardiff, being a seaport that dealt mainly with Yemen, which was where a lot of Welsh coal was taken in order to be a staging post for cargo vessels going to Australia and India and so on. There are wonderful connections with the Middle East and with Africa, and so many of the people who lived in those countries came and lived in Cardiff. And Bert Hardy does a story about black people on the streets of the UK, and it's a wonderfully warm picture story, beautifully done and edited. And the thing about a picture story, and this is how David Hearn constructed the course at Cardiff, was that it's built essentially around 5 pictures. You need an establishing picture, which might be a wide shot, or it might be a very close-up detail, but it's something that is a bit surprising, perhaps, that gives you an overall feel for what the story is about. So it could be just a view of somewhere where something's taking place, but it would be a view with feeling. If this was a place where something lowering and dangerous was about to happen, you'd have, maybe black skies and, smoke rising from campfires or whatever. Or if it was, it might be something about medicine. So it might be, a very close-up picture of something that's familiar as being an establishing picture. A close-up of the human eye or something, looking like something else altogether. So you have an establishing picture. You usually have somebody doing something, particularly if it's a story that involves human activity. You have somebody doing something, and that's quite a difficult picture to do often. How you photograph the person working. Is it close-up work? Is it work that can be seen from a distance? If so, what's the peak of the action? Is it hard work? Is it easy work? Is it strenuous? Is this person going to get a sweat on doing this work, or are they going to, is it going to involve their thinking processes? And how do you reveal that in a picture and so on? So, an establishing picture, a person working kind of picture, a relationship picture, two people doing something together. is always a nice picture to have in the toolkit when you're assembling a picture story, and often that can be quite intense. Two people arguing, two people, kissing or being friendly or playing, or it could be two people intent on some joint activity. It may be a relationship that they're aware of themselves, or it may be a relationship that only you see as the photographer. You see, somebody emptying a dustbin into the back of a corporation truck while somebody is tipping rubbish onto the street, and they're both unaware that the other one's there, but you as the photographer see these two things together and you make the connection. Then you would have a portrait, probably. Most stories that involve people involve a formal kind of portrait, which might, where the photographer's in charge. There's going to be some lighting involved, there'll be some control over what the person's wearing even, where you're in charge as the photographer, you're directing a picture. That's another useful picture to be able to draw on. Being able to do a tight headshot, very difficult, animated tight headshot, full of expression. And then you can start putting these pictures together, the wide, the close-up, the middle distance picture, the person working, the relationship picture, the establishing, and you can start pacing these, so you can start imagining them falling on the page, a picture that might take up a whole double page spread, or one that might be really small but still work with impact. And so you might start by trying to put 3 pictures together as a little essay. You might expand it to 5, and then you might get ambitious and go as far as 12. But we always used to say if you can't do it in 12, you're not going to be able to do it. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of the picture essay and the photo essay, and you don't really need to go much further than the Tom Hopkinson library in the Centre for Journalism Studies at Cardiff University.
Cool. Anything about photographers in relation to that partnership thing with writers?
Photographers and writers, yes. It's always a weird one in that in Britain, we have been talking today. In Britain, there's always been this sort of class system where the writer was perceived as being the intelligent one, and the photographer was the sort of idiot with the camera. So you often had writers who'd introduce themselves. Oh, and this is my photographer. You never had a photographer coming in saying, "Oh, this is my writer." And yet often the picture was the thing that made the story. And if you've got bad pictures, or you can't lay them out, or they're all shot from the same distance, it's really difficult to create impact on the page. But if you've got good pictures, then it doesn't. It probably means most people aren't going to bother reading what's written there. Well, it's true, isn't it? I know that Bert Hardy story on multicultural Cardiff inside out, but I couldn't tell you who wrote it. I can't tell you anything that's written with it either. But having said that, there were some great writers who worked with photographers on picture essays, and also were very good at working with photographers on being able to help the photographer edit the true meaning of the story. I think that probably we all think of Eugene Richards as being I think we probably all think of Eugene Smith as being the great photographer of the photo essay for Life magazine, with stories like Country Doctor and Nurse Midwife. These were stories that we, used to unpick all the time with the students, trying to understand how they worked and what we could learn from them. In terms of pace, distance at which pictures are shot, in terms of moment, in terms of how they're laid out, in terms of these structures of establishing and so on. But I think that when Eugene Smith was left to his own devices, as for instance with the massive story he did about, was it Pennsylvania, that kind of never ever got finished? Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, the story on the steel production town, city. it was never finished, because he didn't have the discipline really to edit his own material. And so the relationship between the picture editor, the art director, the person who's laying the thing out, and the writer is all absolutely crucial when it comes to how the thing looks on the page. A good picture story can be completely ruined by the way it's laid out.
Yeah.
So I would argue that the role of the writer is very important in helping the photographer to understand what the story is about. The role of the designer is really important in how the story is going to be understood by an audience, and then, and the photographer who can keep all this in his head while he or she is shooting the story to make it work. That's the challenge for the photographer. Yeah, so it's a team job, shooting a picture essay and doing it well and helping it to reach an audience. And it's a big sadness, if I look at East 100th Street and the way it was laid out in the Sunday Times, the Bruce Davidson story in 1969, or I look at Don McCullin's story about the Nigerian war in whatever that was, 1970-ish, 71, wasn't it? I think the Bangladesh war story that he did in 1971. Yeah. These stories, when you look at them, they go on for pages in the magazine, unbroken, without any advertising in them. And the impact of those was way beyond the readership of the magazines, because they were, we used to pin them up everywhere and, share them with other people who hadn't seen the magazines when we were students. These are very, very powerful stories, and you don't see anything like that in magazines now. I don't see in the run-of-the-mill magazines one sees when you go down to W.H. Smith's and pull things off the shelves. There's nothing. Pictures now are just treated like they're just space fillers, whereas here you really had a sense, in the heyday of the picture essay, which I would say was probably Life magazine when it got going before the Second World War, Picture Post during the Second World War and into the 1950s. Then there was a bit of a lull, and then in the late 60s and the 70s, the Sunday Times in particular in Britain was extraordinarily good. And obviously there were magazines in Germany and Spain and so on, Italy, that were doing pretty well. But it all kind of... what happened was that there was a belief that the subject matter of picture stories was about humanity and about how we had a common humanity and we wanted to share these things. And actually the business of the magazines is about selling advertising. And so the editorial increasingly crept towards, lifestyle and celebrity. And for people like me, that was a complete switch off, I care so little about lifestyle and celebrity that I couldn't even raise the energy to put film in the camera,
Do you think it's possible to revive the photo essay, specifically here in Wales, to revive it here in Wales?
Yeah, I mean, all the things I've just said about Picture Post and so on, I don't think we should ever go backwards. I don't think we should suddenly say, let's make Picture Post again, because Picture Post wasn't just a set of pictures on pages as laid out in a magazine. It was a cultural object of its time. So what would the cultural object of its time look like if it was a picture essay in 2017? And I would argue that we live in this wonderful age where it's possible for photographs to be augmented with sound, or sound to be augmented with photographs. And so it's quite possible now, for instance, for you to have a picture that maybe you reproduce it on on bus shelters all over Cardiff. And all people would have to do would be to pull out their phone and they'd be able to hear the people in the picture talking about it. There's loads of apps that you can do. But the image recognition is one that's very much used in galleries now, where you literally you choose the app on your phone, you point your phone at the picture, and the phone app knows what the pictures are that are in the series. It identifies that picture and plays you some audio of what's going on in that picture to you. So the people in the picture or somebody tells you something about what's going on in the picture. So in a way, that's becomes a picture story in our age, the age we're living in. So yes, I mean, I think there are any number of ways in which these can be augmented. I mean, when I was doing digital storytelling at the BBC back in the noughties, in a way, we were telling picture stories. We were using the pictures that were in people's own archives, their family photos, and then we were using those to help frame compelling stories about people's lives, which they then scripted and voiced themselves and pieced together as a picture essay, which might have, a dozen pictures, 250 words, except that it looked like a film. But film had never been anywhere near it. So, there's any number of ways of doing these things. I love there was a lovely thing, I'm trying to remember what it was called, on the New York Times website. They did have a very good multimedia unit for modern ways of dealing with the picture story, and I think a lot of those pages are still live. But there was a wonderful, I'm trying to remember what it was called. But the photographer appeared to move in and out of shops and houses and people's companionship on a street or two in some part of New York. And you'd see pictures. And as you scrolled through them, this was a website screen that scrolled left to right rather than up and down. And as you scroll, and the pictures filled the page. And as you scrolled through them, the voices of these people that you were looking at played through the speakers in your computer. If you went fast, you just heard little glimpses of them. If you went slowly, you could sit and listen to someone talking for 10 minutes. And that was absolutely magical. Yeah, there's a lot of good work like that being done. And do it. Go for it.